What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in this video I'm going to be updating my top 24 Dynasty rankings. With the NFL draft wrapping up, we have a few players, added to this top 24. Overall, the running back landscape's a little bit gross in Dynasty. You have some of the top dogs getting up there in age. There hasn't exactly been a ton of young guys to kind of come in and take their place, but as always, I want to know your guys' thoughts down below. Which players do you think are too high, too low? Obviously, the rankings are going to change a little bit based on whether you're a contender or rebuilding roster, but I do have tiers here, to kind of help navigate that. But let's just dive right into it. I'm going to have two tier 1 running backs, and my first running back is going to be Bijan Robinson here. He is going to be my clear RB1. He is a true top tier running back prospect. 8th pick in the NFL draft, which we just do not see in today's NFL. Only 22 years old. He has the 3-down skill set. Arthur Smith is now gone, so his ceiling really is unlocked here. He also has a solid quarterback in Kirk Cousins, so pretty much everything went right for him this offseason. The offense was upgraded. He has a coach that's actually going to use him. He's behind a strong offensive line. I just think he's going to be a high-end running back 1 play for the foreseeable future. Then my RB2, also in Tier 1, is going to be Breece Hall. He's coming off a running back 6 finish in points per game, and that was a season where he was coming off a torn ACL and limited in the first 4 games. So that type of production is crazy off an ACL. He's a great pure runner. He was 6th in rushing yards over expected per attempt last year. He led all running backs in targets, receptions, and receiving yards. So great on the ground. Also a very strong pass catcher, and he's also still only 22 years old. So very young. Should be a high-end running back 1 for a while. Now, shifting into Tier 2, I have 2 Tier 2 running backs, and I think a lot of people are going to want this first guy in Tier 1. It's going to be Jahmyr Gibbs, 12th overall pick, very strong prospect, 22 years old, and coming off a very impressive rookie season, a better rookie season fantasy-wise than Bijan Robinson. He was the running back 8 in points per game, and he really kind of turned it up towards the end of the year, kind of backloaded his points. After starting off, a little bit slow, people were a little bit worried, but he definitely came through in the end. The only thing that's holding him back from being in Tier 1 is I just don't think he has the ceiling to compete with Bijan Robinson or Breece Hall. At 5'9", around 200 pounds, he's likely never going to be a workhorse, and I think the Lions have kind of shown that they don't want to use him as a workhorse. He can still be a really strong running back 1. He can be a high-end running back 1, in peak seasons where he hits either, a ton in the receiving game or he kind of hits in the touchdown department, but I just don't think he has the ceiling to compete with those 2 guys ahead of him, which is why I have him a tier lower. And then my other Tier 2 running back, a clear win now asset, it's going to be Christian McCaffrey. As long as he stays healthy, he's going to be a high-end running back 1. He was the running back 2 in points per game in 2022. The running back 1 in points per game in 2023, and he had that stretch of like 3 years where he struggled to stay healthy, but every time he's logging legit games, he's a high-end running back 1. Last year, he led all running backs in red zone touches, rushing yards, total touchdowns, target share, route participation, and breakaway runs. So, just dominant across the board. He is almost 28, which is obviously, the limiting factor here, why he's a clear win now piece. But most of the running backs I have ranked after him, I just don't think can touch his ceiling. So if you're winning now, and you're choosing between him or some younger backs, you just have to gauge, do you want the long-term production, or do you want the dude who can legit give you 23 plus points per game for the next, 2-3 seasons, and then maybe ease into an RB2 role. So that's going to wrap up Tier 2. Now pivoting into Tier 3, actually another 2-man tier, we're going to start off with Devon Achane, and he's a pretty unique player to rank here because you can definitely poke holes in what his future workload's going to be, even more so than a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs. You can also poke some holes in some potential durability concerns. At 5'9", 190, he's never going to dominate the work in a backfield, and I think the Dolphins have kind of shown that they don't want him to with his year 1 usage, and then also with them drafting Jalen Wright to potentially be his future committee member. But as a rookie, on 9.4 carries and 3.4 targets per game, Achane finished as the running back 5 in points per game. That is insane, fantasy production on that type of limited workload. He led all running backs in yards per touch, fantasy points per opportunity, and breakaway run rate. He also destroyed, and I mean destroyed, every other running back in rushing yards over expected per attempt. He was at 2.87. The next highest was Christian McCaffrey at 1.32, so we over doubled him up in that category, which is just wild. So he's incredibly efficient. He's attached to Mike McDaniel, so he's going to have those big play opportunities. And I think even if he's in a committee, he can still put up massive games like we saw in 2023. And then my other tier 3 running back is going to be Jonathan Taylor, my RB6. He's been disappointing over the last 2 seasons, but it's mainly just been injury related, which, kind of tough to gauge and tough to ding him for. And he was a dude who was exceptionally healthy in college and his first 2 NFL seasons, so there's not really a reason to assume that he's more likely to get injured than some of the other guys in these rankings. We heard it too with Christian McCaffrey, right? Oh, he's injury prone. He's been hurt the last few years. When he was healthy in college, he was healthy early on in his NFL career. He starts to slip in drafts a little bit, and then all of a sudden he logs 2 very healthy seasons. So I'm not super concerned about the durability here for Jonathan Taylor. The running back position gets hurt. It's very physically demanding. Kind of just comes with the territory here. But I just think moving forward, the Colts run game really does have the upside to just be insane. Shane Steichen at head coach, a strong offensive line, Anthony Richardson, a dual threat quarterback, and then JT at the running back position. The efficiency is just going to be wild. Jonathan Taylor's still only 25 years old. I think he should have a pretty solid number of fantasy RB1 seasons left in him. Just got to hope he stays healthy here, and also Anthony Richardson within this offense. Now moving into tier 4, a little bit of a larger tier. I'm going to start off with Travis Etienne. He was the running back 7 in points per game last season. He hit in the touchdown department, and he upped his receiving usage. But with those things going up, he also saw an increase on the ground, but his efficiency kind of fell off, which is what was disappointing. The previous season, he was super efficient on the ground. He was a great runner, but the receiving work and the touchdown opportunities weren't there. Unfortunately, the efficiency did not stay in 2023. He was actually 3rd in rushing yards over expected per attempt in 2022 at 1.29. He was bottom 12 in 2023 at negative 0.29. 25 years old, so still pretty young here. He had the 6th highest opportunity share in 2023. I think he's a high-end running back 1 ceiling if he can blend that efficiency with his year 2 receiving workload. I just don't quite think he's in tier 3 territory. I don't know if he has the long-term stability of a guy like Jonathan Taylor, and I also just don't know if he has the consistent ceiling of a guy like Devon Achane. I wouldn't be shocked if Etienne potentially on his 2nd contract is not in as great of a situation, but kind of splitting hairs here. He's my RB7, still very in on him. Actually, behind Travis Etienne, I'm going to have Jonathan Brooks, and this is probably going to be higher on Brooks than most, but I mean, he just checks a lot of the boxes that you would want in a dynasty running back. He gets really strong draft capital, mid-round 2. The Panthers landing spot, I think, has real workhorse upside with Dave Canales. We saw him just force feed Rachaad White. I think Jonathan Brooks is a way more talented running back than Rachaad White. And he's coming off an ACL, but he's still 20 years old, so very, very young. And the fact that he went mid-round 2 coming off a torn ACL, where would he have been going if he was 100% healthy? We're talking early round 2, maybe even potentially sneaking into the 1st round, which is obviously insane for running backs. He's a 3-down skill set, very strong runner, also a great pass catcher, so it really is just tough to put him lower than this. Assuming he stays healthy, I feel like a realistic floor is probably 8 seasons of RB2 production. In this role with his skill set, I don't see how he's not a running back 2 if he is healthy. But I also think he could end up just straight up being a fantasy running back 1 if he hits. And if he is a fantasy running back 1 at 20 years old, he could do that for a very, very long time, especially with how weak the current running back landscape is. And then also, just when we're looking at his draft capital, when we're looking at the guys who have gone in the 2nd round, but the first half of the 2nd round, which is where he went, you have some really strong hits. So in 2022, you had Breece Hall, Kenneth Walker. Breece Hall, obviously a stud. Kenneth Walker, maybe slightly disappointing, but I mean, still a hit here. He's still valued by most people as a fringe Dynasty RB1, back-end Dynasty RB1. In 2021, you had Javonte Williams. Hasn't necessarily been a hit, but I feel like that's kind of more injury related and some coaching turnover, so not entirely his fault. 2020, you had DeAndre Swift. Swift hasn't exactly, been hitting super consistently, but he continues to get new opportunities. Got a 3-year extension with the Bears, or new contract with the Bears. Jonathan Taylor, also in that 2020 class, obviously a hit. 2018, you had Nick Chubb, which is great. Ronald Jones, Kerryon Johnson, not as great, but even a guy like Ronald Jones did get a legit crack to be the Buccaneers running back one, just didn't really pan out. And then 2017, Dalvin Cook and Joe Mixon, both hits. So this is a pretty nice, sweet spot here in terms of draft capital. First half of the second round, especially at this point in the NFL with how they value running backs and not being overly high on them, not trying to reach on them in drafts. I think we're in a really good spot here with Jonathan Brooks, and that is why I'm pretty high on him. Then the next running back, my RB9, also in tier 4, it's going to be Saquon Barkley. He lands with the Eagles in free agency, a 3-year deal. I think it's a nice landing spot. Some people are acting like this is like the best landing spot out there. I'm not quite there. I think it would be pretty awesome if they end up limiting Jalen Hurts' goal line sneaks. But if they're still doing the tush push, that's going to greatly limit Saquon Barkley's touchdown upside. He's obviously more of a win now asset at 27 years old, but I think he could deliver, a few more RB1 seasons out there. I think the only concern is what his max ceiling is, because I feel like, after his rookie year, everyone thought Saquon was just going to be an absolute fantasy monster the rest of his career. He actually has not hit a season with 20-plus PPR points per game since his rookie year. So is that in the cards if he doesn't have that crazy touchdown upside? Eagles did up their passing volume to running backs last year, but they upped it from pretty much league worst to middle of the pack. So if he's not hitting a great season as a pass catcher and he's not super involved on the goal line, you're asking him to do a lot of work on the ground to really deliver a 20-plus point per game ceiling. So hopefully, they shift a little bit. Maybe he gets some more goal line looks. Going from, Kenneth Gainwell, DeAndre Swift on the goal line to Saquon Barkley is definitely a difference. But we'll see if he does get an uptick there. And then my final tier 4 running back, still going to be in tier 4. It's going to be Kyren Williams. He definitely loses a little bit of value with the Rams drafting Blake Corum, but I don't think he falls off completely. Some people may think Blake Corum's going to come in, be the running back one. I don't. I still think Kyron's going to be the guy there. He kind of came out of nowhere and was just wildly impressive in 2023. 12 games, rushed for over 1,100 yards, caught 32 passes for 206 receiving yards, scored 15 touchdowns. He also had the 7th best rushing yards over expected per attempt. So not only was he getting a lot of volume as a pretty small back, 5'9", sub 200, but he was also efficient with those opportunities. But like I said, at that size, I don't think a long-term workhorse role was something that was going to be super likely for him. So maybe you would have preferred they get a day 3 guy. But, round 3, Blake Corum, come in, maybe get some goal line work, get some of the early down touches here and there. I don't think it's a killer. Obviously, it's going to zap his, top upside a little bit, but still pretty young here, and he's going to be in my top 10. Now, pivoting into tier 5, we're going to start off with James Cook, and I feel like he's a pretty big winner from this offseason. The only added competition he got in this backfield was day 3 Ray Davis. Cook was the running back 19 points per game last season. The big limiting factor for him was the lack of goal line opportunities. 17 games, only 4 goal line carries. Some of those were going to other guys, Damian Harris, Latavius Murray, maybe Lenny got in there for a couple games, but also just Josh Allen in there vulturing on the goal line. The workload was fine, almost 14 carries, 3.2 targets a game. I think we could see his receiving usage increase a little bit just based on the current state of the Bills' weapons. I don't know if James Cook is ever going to be, maybe in a peak season, he gets into RB1 territory, back-end RB1. He's not going to be a workhorse back. He's always going to have another kind of complementary guy in there. But on a good offense, still pretty young. I think he could be just a nice, consistent running back 2 for you. And ranked here at RB11, if he's a high to mid-tier running back 2 for the foreseeable future, it's a fine spot to pick him. And then also in tier 5, it's going to be Kenneth Walker. Probably a little bit lower on Kenneth Walker than consensus. I think he's a very, very good player, but I also feel like Charbonnet coming in just really caps his upside. Kenneth Walker didn't catch passes in college. He's had limited receiving usage in his first 2 seasons, and I think there's a real concern that this is just a straight-up committee moving forward. He's still only 23 years old, though, and I do think he's talented, so he doesn't really have to be a consistent RB1 year after year to pay off. And then also, who knows what happens after the next 2 years, right? He could be gone from the Seahawks in a completely different landing spot at only 25 years old and still be super productive and maybe have an RB1 ceiling there. So still very young. The next 2 years might be a little bit disappointing with a potential committee, but I think he'll be fine in the long run. And then behind Walker, I'm going to be going with Isaiah Pacheco. And in redraft, I'm actually getting higher and higher on Isaiah Pacheco, and I think that has to translate over to Dynasty, just looking at like his short-term outlook here. He's the clear running back one on this Chiefs depth chart. With him being like a day 3 later round guy, there was always going to be concerns about him being replaced. Do they bring someone into free agency? Do they draft someone, like draft a replacement or someone to split touches with him? And it just really hasn't happened. Like the Chiefs have not brought in legit competition, which tells me they do view him as their clear running back one. He had the 7th most red zone touches last year, but only the 12th most touchdowns. It was a down year for the Chiefs offensively, and I could definitely see the Chiefs kind of bouncing back, Pacheco maintaining a similar workload and hitting in the touchdown department. And then we're looking at, some decent upside out of Isaiah Pacheco. Like I talked about, day 3 picks don't have a ton of long-term security, but he's 24 years old. The competition is not there currently, so at least in the short term, he's in a really good spot here with this Chiefs offense. Then also in Tier 5, going to have Rachaad White. Coming off an overall successful fantasy season, he was the running back 10 in points per game. He did really struggle for the second straight year as a runner. He had actually had the worst rushing yards over expected in 2023 at negative 110 yards. On the bright side for Rachaad White, the only competition they added was day 3 pick Bucky Irving, who's pretty much like a smaller, less athletic Rachaad White in terms of their skill sets, and he excels in the area where Rachaad White has been productive. Rachaad White's been a good pass catcher. He saw an uptick in volume last year. He was solid in that role. The area he struggled was as a pure runner, which is not really Bucky Irving's kind of, strong suit. So I think he has a pretty solid shot of holding on to that clear RB1 role. And I feel like if he does hold on to it, he probably has a decent shot of maintaining a pretty strong workload also, because if he's the better pass catcher, then like, is Bucky Irving really coming in and taking early down work like a super undersized back, didn't test well athletically? I don't know. So I think, Rachaad White probably is a winner just from this overall offseason. But as a player, I do think there are some legit concerns because we're almost propping him up because we don't think Bucky Irving is that great. But like, is Rachaad White that great that he's going to hold off another running back that's not great? I don't know. I guess we'll have to wait and see. That's kind of why I have him here as a higher end RB2. Behind him, we're going with Josh Jacobs. And Jacobs was pretty tough for me to rank here because I do think it's possible he's just kind of cooked. But if he's not cooked, then he's in a great situation here with the Packers, especially if this ends up being a longer extension. Jacobs was the 5th worst running back in rushing yards over expected. On a per game basis, Josh Jacobs underperformed his expected fantasy points per game by 3.6. That was worst in the NFL amongst running backs who actually logged like a legit number of games. And his deal with the Packers could end up just being a 1-year deal. They pretty much have an out after a year. I think it was a 4-year contract, but they could get out of it, and with them drafting Marshawn Lloyd, it seems like they could get out of it. On the other hand, though, he's only 26 years old. He was the running back 3 in points per game in 2022, and if he bounces back, like on this Packers offense, very young unit, going to be a nice offense, he could end up being a running back 1 for the next few years. So I just feel like there's such a wide range of outcomes where it's like if he really is cooked, like he could be dust after this season, especially if he's done with the Packers. But if he's not cooked, then he definitely should be ranked higher than this. Kind of just have to balance it and decide, how you're feeling about him as a player. And then my final Tier 5 running back, our second, and I believe final rookie in this video, it's going to be Trey Benson. He gets early round 3 draft capital, which is good to see. I think he was the 2nd or 3rd pick of the 3rd round. And this is a pretty decent spot to just be like the RB1 of the Cardinals moving forward. Connor was really good last year, and he was so good that it made me think maybe they don't bring in like immediate competition. But this is the last deal on his contract. He's 29 years old, so definitely getting up there in running back years. He's also just struggled to log a full healthy season pretty much throughout his entire NFL career. Benson is nice size, 6 foot, 216, ran a very, very fast 4.39 40, and he can catch passes. Didn't handle a crazy college workload, which means, this year he may be the 1B of a committee. Maybe in the future he's like the 1A of a split. He might not be a dominant workhorse, but at this, area, RB16, that's fine. You're not really expecting like future 3-down workhorse at this territory. So that's wrapping up Tier 5. Shifting into my second to last tier, Tier 6. We're going to start off with Tajay Spears. I'm probably a little bit higher on Spears than consensus. I think people are looking at the Tony Pollard signing and they're just, expecting Tajay Spears' value to just completely fall off. I wouldn't be surprised if this was a pretty close split. Spears was solid as a rookie. Pollard's efficiency really fell off when his usage increased in 2023. Right, I was really high on Tony Pollard heading into last year. It was like he'd been wildly efficient, but the workload, the opportunity share, that was what was holding him back. Now, I do believe he was dealing with an injury last season and coming into the year, but when they upped his volume, the efficiency really just plummeted, and he did not pay off for fantasy. And even though this was a 3-year deal, I believe, it's pretty much likely going to end up being a 2-year deal. They have an opportunity to get out of it after 2 years, which is something you're going to see with a lot of the running backs I'm going to be talking about here. And at that point, Tajay Spears will still be 25 years old and have the opportunity to lead a backfield. That'll be like the 4th year of his rookie deal, which means he could lead, set himself up for an extension, or just play well enough that he gets a decent contract somewhere else. So you may have to wait a little bit for him to really unlock his kind of ceiling production. But I think in the short term, he could still be like an RB3 week to week, high-end RB3, especially if Will Levis hits. Like, this offense could be interesting. So he's going to start off tier 6. And my next guy in tier 6 is going to be DeAndre Swift. He signed a 3-year deal with the Bears this offseason. Another contract, though, that's pretty much locked in for 2 years, maybe not the 3rd. This is a young, rising Bears offense. Hopefully we see the Bears kind of unlock his receiving ceiling. He's not a great pure runner, if we're just being honest, but he is a top-tier receiving back. Something we saw him get a lot of work in Detroit. Even though it felt like he wasn't used, super effectively in Detroit, he still got a lot of receiving volume. Wasn't necessarily a great skill fit in Philadelphia. They're just not going to heavily target those running backs. I expect the Bears are probably going to shop Khalil Herbert, just because right now it's a pretty crowded running back room with Swift, Herbert, and Roschon Johnson heading into his 2nd season. I do think there's an argument that there's a lot of cooks in this kitchen in terms of guys who need targets. Rome Odunze, DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, Cole Kmet, DeAndre Swift. So it'll be interesting to see how much volume he can actually get as a pass catcher. But this offensive line's improving. This offense is going to be infinitely better than it was last year. So I think a mid-tier RB2 price, I think, is a fair kind of ranking here. And then also in tier 6, going to be rolling with Javonte Williams. He tore his ACL in 2022 and then came back, struggled last season, 3.6 yards per carry, the 7th worst rushing yards over expected, and he was the fantasy running back 31 in points per game. This is a pretty crowded backfield, but it's not really crowded by studs. It's like if Javonte is kind of cooked, then he'll blend into this backfield, right? He's got 1 year left. You're looking at Samaje Perine, Jaleel McLaughlin, Audric Estime. Samaje Perine is kind of like a career veteran depth option. Jaleel McLaughlin coming off a pretty nice rookie season, but the draft capital's not there. He's a smaller back. I don't think he's ever going to be really carrying a backfield. And then Audric Estime, day 3 pick, probably more of someone year 2, year 3 to get more involved in this offense. But on the bright side, he's only 24 years old, so still pretty young, and I think he could bounce back in his 2nd year back from the torn ACL. Not everyone's Breece Hall, where you can tear your ACL and then just come back in and be dominant in your 1st year back. He's kind of an anomaly there. So I think Javonte could bounce back. The kind of problem here is he's just never really hit a huge fantasy season, and he's 3 years into his career. So what's the ceiling there? Hopefully he has, solid production this year and either gets an extension with the Broncos or goes elsewhere into a decent running back landing spot. And now pivoting into tier 7, this is pretty much going to be like your win now territory. And we're going to start it off with Derrick Henry. He's as win now as you can get. Signs a 2-year contract with the Ravens. I think that contract could end up delivering 2 more running back 1 seasons. We saw Gus Edwards score 13 touchdowns last year on a sub 50% opportunity share. Derrick Henry was the running back 16 in points per game last year, but that was on a miserable Titans offense. And with Tajay Spears kind of cutting into his usage, especially later on in games where they needed someone who was more of a pass-catching back, this is just a massive step up landing spot-wise with the Ravens. This backfield averaged 24.3 PPR points per game. It's not a ton of competition. I really liked Keaton Mitchell, but he's coming off a season-ending injury, so I'm not sure how involved he's going to be. Coming back. So Derrick Henry, a great win now option here is like an RB2 play. Another win now option, Alvin Kamara, my RB21. He's going to be 29 when the season starts. He was the running back 3 in points per game last year, which seems kind of crazy, but like a lot of it was empty volume, if we're being honest with ourselves. He was not efficient, 4th fewest rushing yards over expected per attempt. He was 2nd in targets, but only 26th in yards per reception, so he was getting a lot of volume, but it wasn't really like meaningful production in terms of like real football. And I don't think we can just expect the Saints to just like force feed him with that empty touches again. Like Kendre Miller was a day 2 pick last year. Got to think he's going to be more involved here. He dealt with some injury problems. So I think Kamara could definitely be like a solid RB2 for a few more years. Not really expecting RB1 production, but I guess we can't like completely count it out with Kamara. And then that's going to lead us into another veteran running back with Joe Mixon. Signs a 3-year contract with the Texans. Another one of those that's probably more of a 2-year deal. He's going to be 28 by the time the season starts, so getting up there a little bit. But I mean, this is a prime opportunity to be the running back 1 for a top offense. Devin Singletary's gone. The new coaching regime is clearly not high on Dameon Pierce at all. Like, he should have walked into that starting spot, and he really didn't. Mixon's likely going to be drafted in like the high-end RB2 territory, but he has a real shot to be a fantasy RB1, especially if he hits in the touchdown department. The Texans, even though they had, solid weapons last year, CJ Stroud, they were still pretty committed to the run game. It wasn't overly efficient, but I think Mixon's going to get his opportunities here. Wide open depth chart, so pretty awesome landing spot here for Mixon. My second to last player in these rankings, it's going to be David Montgomery. I just think he's going to be a solid running back 2 for the next couple of years. He also has RB1 upside if Jahmyr Gibbs goes down, so he's kind of in this unique spot. Like, some of the guys around him may give you running back 2 production, but they're giving you RB2 production as the running back 1. If Jahmyr Gibbs goes down, Montgomery's shouldered a workhorse role before. He can do it, so he does have that like extra added, kind of upside added in there. He's going to be 27 when the season starts, so getting up there a little bit, a win now guy. But I think he's just like a fine weekly option RB2 play with that potential ceiling like I talked about. And then my final running back here, this could have gone to a few different options. Don't love it, but going with Ramondre Stevenson. He was the running back 10 in points per game in 2022. Fell to RB27 last year on just a really, really gross Patriots offense. He's on the last year of his rookie deal. I view him as like an RB2 play for this season, and then hopefully he stays in a lead role either with the Patriots or elsewhere, but kind of a big year to determine the future of his just career and then also obviously his fantasy production. So that's going to wrap it up for my top 24 Dynasty running backs. Gets tough towards the end. Like I said, not a great position. At wide receiver, you just have so many top options. Running back just does not feel the same way at all. So let me know your guys' thoughts. If you enjoyed the video, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel. I'll also be going through my wide receivers, quarterbacks, and tight ends. So stay tuned for all of that. Thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.